This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
It was unimaginable that we would see rates move this fast. That was not in the realm of thinking.
Just the timeline of what they knew and when they knew it. Why didn't they do anything about it?
When do we have to see the kill? It's always for the Fed to respond to it. And this is really the tension.
Be informed.
You cannot be overly data dependent. You've got to have a view of where you're going.
Be prepared.
I think the earnings season might actually be the positive surprise that people are not expecting.
Be ahead of the game.
Certainly the beginning of something we need to keep an eye on.
And that, I think, is really going to be an interesting takeaway from this moment.
You go all birds on us and you say, turn, turn, turn. Is that what we're doing right now?
Yeah, the big question coming into this year for us was, when is that turn going to be?
What a fantastic conversation.
The news you need.
The president's calling on manufacturers to make more in America. It is working, and it's reflected in these jobs numbers.
The analysis you trust.
How do you take this anecdotal data and say, really, just focus on the now, because that is going to tell you where we're going?
What is the measurement of uncertainty that we have in studying the American economy?
Milton Friedman had said there are long and variable lags in the impact of monetary policy. But man, it's a long slog.
The best way to start your day.
People are tuning into this program on a daily basis.
Oh, come on, it makes for good TV.
Let's move on.
Bloomberg Surveillance. Weekdays from 6 to 9 a.m. Eastern.
So how is a circular economy different from recycling?
A circular economy is more systemic and ambitious than a linear one. Most recyclable products in a linear economy ultimately get downgraded into waste. But in a circular economy, no new material input is needed. That leads to less waste and ultimately reduced costs. The linear economy often leads to a system that is inefficient and costly and depletes natural resources. A byproduct of this is material waste, which takes up space and may include contaminants, threatening biodiversity. But still making a production cycle fully self-sufficient is virtually impossible. Some new input will always be necessary. Some waste will always be created. Building a circular economy also requires high upfront costs. And some say a circular economy will only ultimately delay the negative environmental effects of the linear economy. Consumers are largely responsible for pushing organizations towards the circular economy and can get companies to invest in more circular supply chains. For example, SC Johnson & Son and Unilever are developing refillable packages for cleaning products and laundry detergents. Governments also have a hand, making cross-border commitments and developing action plans to move toward a more circular economy. So slowly we're seeing people become more and more conscious, and they are challenging the sustainability of the linear economy model.
With its strong sun and abundant winds, Chile has some of the best conditions for renewables. It hasn't been easy capitalizing on this, though. Exporting clean electricity is still challenging. Enter green hydrogen. It can be stored and shipped and also burns without releasing harmful gases. It's produced using an electrolyzer to split hydrogen and oxygen in water, all running on renewable electricity. In Haruoni, the plant not only uses a wind turbine and electrolyzer to make green hydrogen, but it also synthesizes the hydrogen with captured CO2. The eventual product, gasoline, or a substance that's virtually identical to the fuel that can go directly into your cars. The stakes are high not only for owner HIF Global and its international partners, but also for Chile's government.
Because of the places in which green hydrogen is going to be produced, it brings a promise of change to communities that are really affected by climate change.
Chile now has 41 green hydrogen projects in the south and north of the country. Those are regions with high-quality winds and solar radiation and host oil and coal industries that are now dying out. Some warn, however, that the effort to go green could backfire. Environmentalists are concerned about large wind farms in the migratory paths of about 60 bird species, not to mention sea life that could be affected by more maritime traffic. A much larger facility in Patagonia is already facing challenges getting an environmental permit. At a time when confidence is fragile on Chile's stability and commitment to open markets, the leftist government will need to walk a fine line to achieve its environmental goals and also attract global investments.
On the next episode of Hello World, I meet a rocket engine building legend.
When Elon came, he said, hey, I need an engine guy. They recommended me.
Who naturally likes to go fast.
How many tickets have you got? Quite a few.
Watch Hello World Thursdays at 8 p.m. Eastern on Bloomberg Originals or 10 p.m. Eastern on Bloomberg TV.
You have a view on whether digital currency authorized by a government is a good thing or not? And do you think the United States is going to be at the leadership of that or following other countries?
It depends. So the benefits of a digital currency backed by a government are potentially greater ease of execution of transactions and greater visibility. If you use the central bank digital currency to intrude upon the privacy of the individual citizen or to eliminate the role of the retail or high street bank from the financial system, then there are potentially very significant implications. That could be a consequence of a central bank digital currency.
Things like solar or wind, it's nice and environmentally friendly, but really it's not going to produce enough energy to really replace oil and gas in my lifetime, I assume, right?
Well, not by itself. So let me just say, solar and wind are critical components. This is going to be sort of a collective effort with a lot of different technologies that are each going to come in and take their piece. But we do a breakthrough. We look at technologies that could produce half a gigaton, remove half a gigaton of carbon a year. And the way to think about that number is we have to remove, say, 100 half a gigatons, a year in terms of what we have to replace.
What do you think is the most common mistake investors make when they have 100,000, a million, or whatever they might have? What is the most common mistake you have observed that investors make?
I would say hubris and thinking you know more than you do, because every decision that you make has many, many layers. So as you're creating a portfolio, look at the risk as well, not just excited about the return.
And what's the best investment advice anybody's ever given to you?
Continue to learn about innovation in whatever you do, because that is where it's not exciting, that's where returns will go.
From the world of politics.
We're not going to be relying upon countries whose values we don't share.
To the world of business.
It's all about corporate power at the end.
Balance of power.
This is the intersection of Washington and Wall Street.
Bringing people directly to the decision makers that impact your investments and your life.
As they deliver news.
This is such an important economic issue.
He's no longer trying to run away from
that really blew some minds.
Insight.
We can both invest in law enforcement and also make sure that communities feel safe in their own skin.
And analysis.
I think your audience will get this more than most.
This is not the Republican Party that you know.
It allows him to do what he did so successfully in 2020, which is run against crazy.
From and about politics' biggest power players.
This was the zombie case, and it's now more than well alive.
That's for sure, with two more potentially to come. I'm willing to have this battle.
It is vitally important.
We couldn't be more excited what's in store for you.
How long will it take? How many years?
Why don't we take this one day at a time?
Good luck. Everybody has a perspective.
Every weekday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time, only on Bloomberg, your global business authority.
Do you go fixed structure or floating structure, much more like what they do in Europe?
Yes and yes. It's a little bit of a different model than what I was used to in the public company space. Say in some ways we provide ourselves with a
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Election 2024 business debate on Bloomberg TV and on Bloomberg Radio. I'm Anna Edwards. The UK goes to the polls next week, a vote set against a challenging economic backdrop. Returning Britain to stronger growth has been a key pledge from politicians. Business Secretary Kemi Badenoch and Labour's Shadow Business Secretary Jonathan Reynolds are here to outline their visions and to answer questions from Britain's leading business groups. Afterwards, we'll gather together a panel of Bloomberg journalists to get their views. So let us begin. We have done a coin toss to decide who goes first, and it's Jonathan Reynolds who will start with his opening statement. Jonathan, your 60 seconds starts now.
Well, good afternoon. I'd put it to you that there is no reasonable argument for the Conservatives remaining in office. The last 14 years have been marked by political chaos, by economic stagnation, and too frequently by improper behaviour. What business and investors need most of all is stability, and that is only going to come from a change to a Labour government. And on that foundation of stability comes an agenda to get Britain moving again, planning reform, so we actually build the homes and infrastructure that we need. A real industrial strategy so we can compete with the US and EU. Ambition on clean energy so we're never again so vulnerable to energy shocks. And a pragmatic, good faith relationship with the EU. Reform of the apprenticeship levy, of business rates, and a specific agenda for smaller businesses. Only Labour is offering the change we need. And the support businesses have shown us is hugely appreciated. But it is just the beginning. Together we can turn the page on the last few years, look to the future, and start to rebuild Britain.
OK, thank you very much, Shadow Business Secretary Jonathan Reynolds. Over to Business Secretary Kemi Badenoch for her opening remarks.
At this election, business has a simple choice. The Conservatives, who are the party of entrepreneurs and wealth creators, or Labour, the party of trade unions and a big regulatory state. The question you need to ask this afternoon is who is better for me? Who is better for my business? This has been the toughest decade for business globally. After the financial crisis, we managed the economy so that we had enough to get us through a global pandemic. We've been challenged by a war in Europe that has raised energy costs at the same time as we decided to deliver net zero, which I know is a cost to business, while delivering an exit from the European Union, which the people voted for. It has been a time of extreme global turbulence, but we have kept our economy stable, we've brought down inflation, and we are forecast to grow faster than France, Germany, Italy, and Japan over the next 4 years. Now is not the time for more uncertainty by handing the economy to Labour. So this afternoon, I want you to ask, who is best to help your business prosper in what should be a time of great prosperity?
Thank you both very much. Thank you for those opening remarks. We've got a flavour there of the topics that our two guests would like to cover today and to talk about in front of this business audience. So let's get straight into it. And the first topic we're going to talk about is skills. I'll come to you first on this one, Kemi, because you went first, Jonathan, in the opening remarks. So, Business Secretary Kemi Badenoch, the top issue hurting businesses is a lack of skilled workers. That is according to Jonathan Geldart, the Director General of the Institute of Directors, and we're gathered here in front of the IOD and plenty of other business groups as well. So he wants to know how you would fix that problem, this lack of skilled workers. What will you do to fix that issue?
Thank you very much, Hannah. So skills has been right at the top of the agenda for this government. We live in an era where the world is changing, the information age is changing the sort of skills that we need to grow our economy. We know that making sure that people have the right technical and vocational skills in particular is something that business has asked for, and we have invested there. We've invested about 3.6 billion. We want to make sure that people are able to take apprenticeships so they have those practical skills rather than the university degrees that some are taking, which don't necessarily deliver what we need for economic growth. But this is also a place where people want to do business. We're seeing a lot of foreign direct investment. Businesses are investing here, and that is because they do have a lot of the skills that they want to see in the UK. What we need to make sure is that we don't lose our competitive advantage. We have a great scheme on apprenticeships. We spend about 3.6 billion. That is the amount that we've been putting in to make sure that we have skills. We're investing it in the areas that we know are going to deliver growth. And that's what you have with the Conservative agenda. I'm quite worried about the changes that Labour say that they want to make, because that will take apprenticeships away. It's likely to reduce the cost There's about £1 billion that would be unfunded. And my question would be to Jonathan is, where is that money going to come from with the reforms that you're proposing on the
Let's go to Jonathan with that in mind then. And your answer to that question for the IOD, how are you going to fix a lack of skilled workers?
Well, I agree with what Jonathan has put forward there. It is the labour market, which is I'd say the biggest issue that businesses raise with me out of a set of many concerns that they have. Our flagship policy is to do a reform of the apprenticeship levy to allow businesses to spend up to half of those levy funds on other forms of training. That's something we've worked very closely with several people in the room on as a policy. We also want to see further education colleges become specialised into technical excellence colleges. But I would also say on this that when you think about some of the strengths we would all identify in the UK economy, particularly around tech and innovation, that also comes from that higher education base as well. I think you can be proud of both. I often worry about the denigration of higher education by this Conservative government. We should be a country that can recognise the contribution both sectors brings, but I think the changes to the levy we've put forward specifically on apprenticeships, because, look, it was an interesting policy that the Conservative government came out with, but you can't deny the fact that the number of apprenticeships has declined since the levy came in, and therefore keeping the hypothecation with a little bit of flexibility for businesses, I think is the right way forward.
Well, I disagree with that. Many of those apprenticeships and the funding are going towards small and medium-sized businesses. A lot of our growth in this country comes from there. Most people who work in this country work for SMEs, not for the large global corporations. And I would push back on the point that Jonathan is making about higher education. We do value it. But if businesses are telling us that the skills that are coming out from higher education are not the skills they want, then we do need to reorientate what we're doing to make sure that it delivers for business.
So is it about certain degrees that are not worth doing, or is it about
one of the
what
things
you do instead?
It's both. One of the things we've put in our manifesto is talk about reducing those courses which young people go into where they actually end up earning less than if they'd never gone into university at all. That can't be right. And they're taking on loads of debt at the same time. But the thing is, when we talk about skills, it's a small word to cover a very, very big area. Technical, vocational skills, are we talking about skills for the future? Look at a lot of the things that the Prime Minister has done in this field of AI. Elon Musk is saying that there are only two places where you can do AI. It's London or it's Silicon Valley. That is because of what we have been doing. We have the most unicorns, certainly this side of the Atlantic. No one else is doing what we're doing. And that is because we do have skills. Businesses are finding it tough. It is possible for both those things to be true.
Jonathan, Kemi makes the point then that some degrees don't lead to a higher wage, so maybe there's no point in doing them.
Well, look, I would be extremely worried at a situation where Conservative politicians picked which degrees they think have value and which don't. I don't think that would be driven by sound economic thinking. I don't think it would work for businesses. It would be these culture wars which have become such a part of how the Conservative Party operates these days. I think we've got to be proud of that tremendous base. Look, when I go around the world on some of the trade side of the brief, the amount of people you meet who have been educated in the UK, who have a huge affinity, the soft power that generates as well as that. I think it's a much more complex argument than the Conservative Party puts forward. And I'm proud that, I look at the figures for my constituency in Greater Manchester, and I would not want to see any reduction in the number of young people going to university. It's nowhere near half, by the way. It's substantially lower than that. So let's remember the sort of inequality within those figures that's also evident.
OK, that's the skills subject. Let's move on to the broad topic of growth and perhaps take in the fiscal contribution there as well. The CBI's Rain Newton-Smith, the CBI also represented here today, says how the UK manages the transition to net zero is one of the biggest questions facing the economy. I'll come to you first on this one, Jonathan, to make sure we're being even. Should this be seen as a growth opportunity to be seized or a cost to be mitigated? So the UK managing the transition to net zero, it's a big question for the economy. Is it a growth opportunity to be seized or a cost to be mitigated?
Well, it's an opportunity, right? I mean, it couldn't be any clearer than that. It's one of the greatest opportunities that has ever existed. And actually for the UK, when you think about some of that regional inequality that we are very familiar with, the transition could be something that isn't just an opportunity in itself, actually addresses some of the real long, deep-seated problems within the British economy. And the job of government around that is not to deliver that itself. Of course it's not. It's to build and shape the markets that the private sector will then operate around. And one of my huge complaints about the government's agenda has been the lack of stability in their own industrial targets, the chopping and changing around of that. I think that speech the Prime Minister gave was dishonest in the sense it represented the costs today rather than the markets we're trying to build around the cost of transition. And again, if we want people to see the UK as the destination of choice to lead on some of these technologies, they're going to have certainty in the government's plans, and that doesn't exist at the minute. A big part of our wider industrial strategy is giving people the certainty that is required around that. So it is an opportunity, and let's make the most of it.
OK, Kemi Badenoch, net zero transition, a growth opportunity to be seized or a cost to be mitigated?
It is both. And the answer that Jonathan has given gives an insight into how Labour are looking at this problem, which I think is the wrong way. When we decided that net zero was going to be a policy, this was a cross-party thing. It wasn't just Conservatives. There's no major party that has said that it does not want the net zero target by 2050. But that was in 2018. Look at what happened since then. COVID and a war in Ukraine that's completely changed the landscape for what that meant. We need to be able to adapt when circumstances change, not just stay fixed. And that is why the Prime Minister made the announcement that he did last year. To say that that is dishonest is to just show a lack of understanding of the reality of governing. You are not going to write any kind of plan down and expect that nothing will change when it is time to deliver. It is a government that knows how to adapt, how to respond to changing circumstances that you want. That is how you create certainty, and that is how you deal with instability. So much of the instability that we have been seeing is global. Look at what is happening in elections in Europe. Look at what is happening in the US. You know, we don't even want to talk about the candidates that they've got for election. So many difficulties. This uncertainty is all over the world. And we have managed to keep our economy growing. And the point about net zero is that, yes, it can be an opportunity, but we need to make sure that we deliver other things on a no-regrets basis.
OK. And you set out there that there has been a lot of uncertainty around the world, and that must surely be true. But then businesses prize certainty and they prize goals they can plan around, and maybe they want the government to, when it announces plans, to stick to them.
They also want a government that listens. And what business told me was that the electric vehicles mandate, for example, and the deadline we had for 2030 was too soon. You do not want a government that's not going to listen and is just going to stick to a bad plan and take it to its conclusion.
Jonathan,
I strongly agree. I strongly agree with what Kemi is saying about
we are responsive, and that's why we made those changes. But we have not changed the net zero target, so the certainty is still there.
Okay,
I strongly agree. When circumstances change, of course you expect governments to change their plans. When, to be frank, Liz Truss did what she did with that disastrous mini-budget with the support of the Conservative Party across the board, we had to change our plans. I get a lot of questions about, what about Labour's 28 billion? Well, we had to change those plans. So you have to respond to those circumstances. But that isn't, and this is a sophisticated audience, that isn't what the Prime Minister did with that speech. It was a short-lived relaunch of the Rishi Sunak premiership based around him being a change candidate for a brief period of time and changing the plans, fitting the policy around the politics, rather than that being a sound set of decisions that were made. And people understand that, and there is a cost to that. And we all know that. And the certainty that people need, yes, in an uncertain world, those circumstances change, we've got to reflect to that. But we can provide, through our political system in the UK, a far greater degree of certainty than, frankly, we've seen for the last few years.
OK, let's move on to another question around growth. And this is in particular inspired by the Labour manifesto, the Labour's work plans entitled The New Deal for Working People, around unfair dismissal protection from day one, ending zero-hours contracts, of course, has been a Labour goal for some time. Is a Labour government going to make life much more difficult for smaller businesses that drive Britain's growth? Because whilst many may welcome those plans, some smaller businesses might wonder and worry about the costs that will be imposed on them as a result.
Well, no, look, the Labour manifesto, the Labour agenda, is what we call a pro-worker, pro-business agenda, and the agenda reflects that in its aggregate and total form. It's everything from a better business environment around changes to planning, to tax certainty, to how things like the skills system works. But we want that to deliver growth that every part of the UK and every person within it benefits from. And the employment framework the floor will rise, but frankly, the vast majority of businesses operating in the UK are operating to a higher standard than those sets of proposals. It, I think, provides what I would call a flexibility that works both ways. So it doesn't take away some of the advantages of our labour market, but it delivers in a way which isn't one-sided. And it gives people the chance to feel and participate in the economy, to have the benefits for themselves and their family that they're seeking. And it's been developed very closely with businesses to make sure those burdens are not too burdensome.
Kemi Badenoch, developed closely with business. Why has the Conservative Party not tried to introduce those kinds of measures?
Because business doesn't want them. I think it is unbelievable that Jonathan would actually suggest that those employment regulations have been developed with business. Which business? Business is terrified of what Labour is selling. And one of the things that's really interesting is to listen to how Labour talks. He's talking about Rishi Sunak being dishonest. He's talking about Liz Truss. This is very personal. They have no diagnosis of the fundamental problems of this country. All they can see is the individuals in the government. There is no, and if you do not have a good diagnosis, you have no solutions. I would ask him what he thinks business thinks of the new employment regulations that are going to make it very hard to hire, strangling employment right at birth, the day one rights that they're bringing in. Businesses, CEO of Asda, Currys, M&S have said that these are terrible regulations. Which businesses have they developed them with? They are bad ideas.
Well, I strongly push back on that. And I would just remind you, Kemi, when the Conservative Party led this country out of the European Union, you promised an employment bill. You promised many of the things that are in this package. You didn't deliver on them. That's one of the reasons you've lost so much support. You promised people security in the workplace. They haven't had that. And I don't think anyone could look at the set of proposals being put forward by the Labour Party and say they are unreasonable. And the idea, by the way, there's some sort of continental labour market. These are specific things for the UK that will give people the chance to participate and feel a part and feel the benefits of a stronger economy, which in a way is still, without any question, a better business environment to operate in, and which, frankly, give people the kind of security, the kind of work you can raise and build your family around that everyone should be supporting in the UK.
You should be terrified about surrendering your business, the economy, tax to Labour. Absolutely terrified. And the reason why I say that is because the problems in our economy are not to do with flexible working rights. We have some of the most flexible working rights in the world. That is a problem that is solved. We've brought in all sorts of things, working from home, bereavement leave, parental leave, shared parental leave. We have done a lot. The fact that they are fishing in this empty barrel for solutions shows that Labour have no idea what this economy
You've both had time to set out your arguments on that front, and I know the audience here will have many of their own views on this subject. So we will leave that one there for the moment. So look forward to catching up with the audience after the debate outside. Now, what assumptions do you make about growth then impacts your fiscal plans? And it's on fiscal plans and planning that I want to turn next. The IFS has said today that it cannot evaluate fiscal plans in your manifestos, either of you, because they are too opaque. They lack detail on a whole range of tax and spend issues. They say that voters on July 4th, and I'll come to you first on this one, Kemi Badenoch, will be voting in a knowledge vacuum. How does that apply to the Conservative Party and to your manifesto?
Well, I completely disagree with the IFS's assessment. The truth is actually, and I know this from going around my own constituency knocking on doors, is that people are not assessing based on exactly what the IFS's assessment of fiscal plan is. They want to know what we are about, what it is we believe in, what our values are, and then on that basis, they will know whether they can trust what it is that we are saying. And they have our record of what we have done around tax to understand what it is we're doing. It is about making sure that we have sensible public finances, being responsible. That is what Rishi Sunak is about. The public, you know, Jonathan was talking about Liz Truss. They love talking about Liz Truss, but I actually think that what we saw was what happens when you do not try to balance the books. If you're going to have tax cuts, you need to have proportionate spending reductions. Trying to do one without the other just creates a problem. They know that we understand that. We are the party of sound money. We are the party that understands business. So that is what is in our manifesto. We talked about where we're going to make reductions, for instance, on employment and national insurance. They have seen us do that in our budgets over and over again. So they know what they're getting.
OK, and the Labour Party also faces that same criticism from the IFS, Jonathan, but I'd also just like to get your thoughts on the types of growth assumptions that you're trying to get to within the first year, because some of your fiscal plans rely on delivering a lot in the first year in terms of growth, something that a lot of the people in this room might like, but they'd also want to understand how on earth are you going to get there?
Well, look, I respect the IFS, but my frustration is that, look, the Conservative record does speak for itself. I mean, taxes are at a record high. Public services are not reflective of that tax burden. They're not operating anything like across the board. People would expect them to do so. But the answer has got to be breaking out of this low growth, high tax, poor services doom loop. And that is what the Labour manifesto is about. And when you're on the media and people say, well, you know, it's got to be tax rises or spending cuts, the kind of growth that would be the answer to that is not some kind of fanciful, you know, ambitious, beyond compare aspiration. We're talking about if the economy had grown anything like it did under the last Labour government, there'd be billions of pounds more being spent on public services today. If it was anything like the historical average since the end of the Second World War, would do that. And that is all. And the idea that shouldn't be the ambition.
Okay. And a lot of this is going to come from, well, some of this is going to come from construction, I understand, and with the planning regime changes. Just briefly then, as we bring this part to a close, that could involve a lot of fights. Are you ready to take on some of those interest groups that might not like the planning changes
That's why we're asking for a mandate for change. All of this kind of expectation management from the Conservative Party, which I think is pretty cynical. I always say to people, look, if you want change, you want this delivered, you've got to give a party, a government, a mandate for it. And I do think when it comes to getting Britain building the homes, building the infrastructure, which is essential, it is only a Labour government that could do that because of the coalition of people who would be supporting that.
Can I come back on that
briefly,
point?
Yes.
We had a big planning restriction that we could have removed. It was one of the legacy EU laws on nutrient neutrality. We put that in legislation and we lost it in the Lords, where we don't have a majority because Labour voted against it. You can't believe what Labour says. They have all these pie-in-the-sky ideas, but how you do it, they cannot explain. We've been very clear about how we will do this, and it's about lifting the burden of regulation. We had a smarter regulation plan. We like business, they don't like business. I'm not saying the tax burden isn't higher than it should be at the moment. It will be higher with them. Whatever we do, we know that they will do it much worse than that.
I've got to say to Kemi, one of the really big issues around the UK at the minute is the amount of sewage in the waterways. People feel very, very strongly about this, quite rightly. The idea we're going to solve a problem like this by doing what Kemi says, deregulation, will just move the standards that people expect.
But that's
people aren't
not
going to
what we're doing
go along with that. There is a solution to the nutrient neutrality problem. We're very confident we can do that. But this requires, more than anything else, political will. And I would say, look at any local government question session in the House of Commons. It is Conservative MP after Conservative MP saying, will the Secretary of State agree with me? No houses, no infrastructure.
Okay, I don't think we'll find any agreement on that topic.
But Anna, it is very interesting what he has said. It is all about big state, big regulation, not about letting business create
we'll want
growth.
to talk about. Let's turn to trade. The Office for Budget Responsibility says that Brexit, and I'll come to you first on this one, that Brexit has reduced imports and exports. Siobhan Haviland from the British Chambers of Commerce, also represented here, says, what is your top proposal to cut costs for businesses exporting to the EU?
So one of the things that we have seen is a conflation between what's happened because of leaving the European Union and what's happened because of supply chain disruption post-COVID. It's been very difficult to disentangle. Exports in this country have grown. That is a fact.
Okay, but however, my colleagues in Bloomberg News tell me that trade intensity has declined versus other countries. So that excludes the pandemic impact.
Yes, but trade intensity as a metric is not what you need to look at. Trade intensity can depend on what the buyer, what the other country is doing. It depends on who you're trading with. So we need to look at the volumes, what is going out. We are an 80% services economy. Services exports have been going gangbusters. We are the second largest services exporter in the world. We are now the fourth largest exporter in the world. Those are facts.
So
but the question that Siobhan is asking, yes, we will continue to do things to reduce friction. One of the benefits of having an independent trade policy is that you're able to make the specific decisions about what you want to do yourselves. It doesn't mean that these problems didn't exist. They were just decided in Brussels. So we had no idea what was how those decisions were made. Now we get to do them ourselves. So as an example of how we reduce trade restrictions, one of the things that we did with the TCA, the Trade and Continuity Agreement, removing the double tariffs on electric cars because the environment has changed due to what is happening with China and again post-COVID. So we're able to negotiate these changes with our partners. That's how we reduce trade friction.
Okay, Jonathan Reynolds, what are your plans to reduce trade friction so businesses exporting to the EU find their costs reduced?
Absolutely. Look, of course it's had an impact, Siobhan. It'd be ridiculous to suggest otherwise. You couldn't listen to businesses and not understand or appreciate what it has meant for them, but we're going to look to the future. So first of all, to improve that relationship, the biggest thing a Labour government will bring is our relationship to the European Union will not be governed by the internal politics of the Conservative Party. And that allows us to do a lot of things that will benefit for your members. So, for instance, the SPS agreement that we are seeking to deliver will reduce food, on food and agricultural products, will reduce those checks. When it comes to the mutual recognition of professional qualifications, these are the practical things that will do it. And I know some people will say, relitigate the argument, refight it. Look, I don't think talking about customs unions or single markets would get us the kind of stability the UK needs. I think the practical proposals Labour has put forward are deliverable. They're not easy, but they're deliverable, and they'll make a real difference to your members and improve that relationship.
OK, so you've talked about some of the areas that Labour wants to make change to. The EU says it is open to negotiating, for example, a veterinary deal, which is something you've been pushing for, to ease border friction on fresh food, but that it must have a role for the European Court of Justice. Will you accept that as a condition?
Well, look, it's a negotiation. New Zealand has an agreement of this kind, right?
Will you accept a role for the ECJ?
We're not going to give away our negotiating hand entirely, but we believe when we've got... Look, the argument on food and agriculture products is this. Do you want lower standards than the European Union? If you don't want lower standards, surely we remove, pragmatically, some of those checks and balances to make sure we can have as close a relationship as is possible to remove some of those costs. There will still be costs because we're not going to talk about going back into a customs union. So we accept that. But where we can make it better, in any trading relationship, we should always be seeking to make it the smoothest, easiest relationship it can be. And where we've got those comparable standards, there's a basis for negotiation.
I think the answer that Jonathan has given is astonishing. I really do. First of all, let's start with this veterinary agreement that they've got in their manifesto. We proposed this already. We proposed it a long time ago. The EU did not agree. This is what they think is the problem, that if you just have Labour people instead of Tory people, then the EU will like them and everything will be okay. This is not a serious diagnosis of the problem.
Maybe they have a different red line around the ECJ?
Well, this is the thing. What would they have to give up in order to get that? That is the question that they don't want to answer, saying it's part of their negotiating hand. The fact is, we tried it. They said no. Michel Barnier was in the papers yesterday talking about freedom of movement. This renegotiating is just going to be taking us back into the EU without saying so. I think it is absolutely...
I don't think Kemi's been entirely truthful.
A few seconds more. I haven't finished. It will be taking us back. We cannot allow any kind of oversight from the ECJ. That's not something that you should be keeping in your back pocket. That's something that you need to be honest about with the British public.
I think you see the problem here, which is this is a conversation on one side, on the Conservative side, which is all about, to be frank, the next leadership election in the Conservative Party and the red lines within there. Yeah. For people who just want a pragmatic, better, good faith, reasonable relationship with the European Union or any other trading market, unencumbered by some of that politics, Labour's just a much more practical, pragmatic
But we have
choice.
a good relationship with other EU countries. I know, as Trade Secretary, I talked to them. I was able to work with EU Trade Commissioner Dombrovskis to sort out the electric vehicles issue. So they are pretending that we have a bad relationship. We do not. They have no ideas. They're just going to restate what we tried, and they will fail.
I think you might be...
If I could just
you might be overstating
ideas.
Some of the views on the other side.
If I could just pose another question here. I mean, Kemi Badenoch, you say you've got good relations there, good relations, no doubt, with counterparts when you were Trade Secretary around the world. But we never got that US or India trade deal that was much talked about.
Yes, that is true. Because one of the fascinating things about trade is that you need two parties to agree. The US is not signing free trade agreements with anybody. We have a great relationship with the US. Our trade with them is bigger than it's ever been before. But if a country says, we're not doing FTAs right now, there's nothing we can do about that. What we did instead was negotiate state-by-state agreements, not quite full FTAs, but agreements that would deliver many of the benefits that you would see from an FTA, like the one in Florida, or like the one that we did with the Texas governor coming here. With India, that's a very difficult negotiation. I, as Trade Secretary, I'm not going to give away things that I don't think are going to get equal value. For me, an FTA with India is one that business has to like. Otherwise, there's no point in it.
Briefly, Jonathan.
Trade negotiations are a difficult thing. Yes. I have experience of that. Jonathan does not. That's why he's giving these pie-in-the-sky answers.
Well, I think the Conservative Party was extremely naive about what it thought would happen after Brexit. But I agree, you need two sides to do a deal. I think there has been a focus on quantity over quality. Kemi, I think, the MOUs, when you say they're not quite free trade agreements, I mean, they're not at all free trade agreements, if we're being honest. But I think there are opportunities. I mean, India would have to work for us. I think the Gulf is a particularly interesting negotiation. There are others. But, again, we've got to be reasonable. And I think the naivety of the Conservative Party has led us into the position we're in at the minute.
Okay.
I think that this,
and then we'll move on to
this is yet another misunderstanding of what having an independent trade policy is. We had a president in the US who wanted to sign an FTA.
Yes.
That changed. That's not naivety on the part of the Conservative Party. That is geopolitics, and you need to pay attention to the wider environment.
Maybe seen that coming.
Not just what you are writing down on a piece of paper, which is what you are doing.
OK, let's move on to industrial strategy, because we've had questions from people in the room on this subject. And I'll put this to both of you. And in fact, we'll start with you, Jonathan. Make UK's Stephen Phipson says their members overwhelmingly believe growth will come from a long-term industrial strategy, but they warn that manufacturing apprenticeships have fallen by over 40%. So which sectors do you think are the future, and how do you plan to get talented people into those sectors?
Yeah, look, I agree with Make UK and their members on that. I think it's integral to compete, but I also think it's important that other investors or the countries understand what you're trying to do as a country, and that's where industrial strategy is key. It's about stability. It's about coordination across government, which we haven't seen anything remotely approaching that. But in terms of the sectors that would be important to that, of course, there'd be obvious ones for the UK, whether that's financial services, aerospace, automotive. I think education's a particularly interesting potential for export from the UK. On the skills and apprenticeships, look, industrial strategy has to cover everything. The labour market would be a part of that. I think those changes to the levy and technical excellence colleges that we talked about at the beginning are important. Another aspect of Labour's plan is obviously a much greater focus on devolution, and I think the two things go together very well. So if you take Greater Manchester, we are specialising or attempting to specialise our FE provision, do some specific things there, and that needs to reflect the local labour market. And I think you can have a national framework, a national industrial strategy, and that local economic leadership working very well together. We see that, to be honest, in most countries. So it would be an absolutely integral part of what we would bring.
Okay, so you wouldn't pick a sector, specific sectors, you just let the local economy pick those sectors?
There are specific sectors I think you would highlight as part of that, where some of the most significant opportunities are. I think you've got to pick. It can be quite difficult for business. If you're not picking, you're not really having a real industrial strategy. There are, of course, horizontal policies that would make a difference to everyone across the board. But an explicit industrial strategy, I think, is an absolute essential prerequisite of success.
Kemi Badenoch?
I think it's very interesting that at the beginning of his answer, Jonathan said, an industrial strategy has to cover everything. And at the second half of his answer, he said...
No, that's not true.
Well, actually,
you misunderstood.
You have to pick some, which for me just shows a bit of confusion and this belief in central planning that industrial strategy is going to fix everything. We have a plan. You have to prioritise. And our plan, given what has been going on around the world, is that we look at where the UK does well, where we have comparative advantage. That has been what I would classify as our industrial strategy. We haven't called it an industrial strategy, but it is about those growth sectors, creative industries, digital. We had an advanced manufacturing plan. So going back to the specific question you asked, Stephen, about manufacturing apprenticeships, this is something that we want to see more of. We've put £4.5 billion into that. We have seen, for instance, our car industry go from strength to strength. We're producing more cars, I think we did in the last year, than we did the 7 years before then, at a time where car production is falling in Western Europe. So this is how we are delivering for manufacturing. Okay. We don't want to lose manufacturing in the UK. It is absolutely critical. It is a driver of skills. It is a driver of innovation. And our advanced manufacturing plan, which we've already started, is what's going to do.
We've got quite a lot to get through.
If the strategy is working well, how come our own businesses don't know about it? And I'd love to genuinely know why Conservatives think or account for the fact we've got the lowest business investment in the G7 if the strategy is working so well.
We have the largest foreign direct investment in the G7. Business investment metrics are different for us because we are largely a services economy. That means that it is always going to be quite skewed. Business investment has risen a lot in the last year, mainly because of the full expensing policy which Rishi Sunak has brought in.
Okay,
so it is changing.
In 2016.
It's flatlined since 2016. But as I said, being a services economy means that business investment is going to be...
Let's move on to another question from in the room. Craig Beaumont from the Federation of Small Businesses asks, for UK small businesses, and I'll come to you first on this one, Kemi, cash flow is king, they say, with late payments remaining the number one issue, stopping small businesses' investment and growth. If elected, what will you do about that in next month's King's speech?
Well, one of the things that we have been really focused on is trying to improve the landscape for faster payments. I think it is extraordinary how larger corporations treat those smaller companies within their supply chain. We will look again at more regulation. We already have many pieces of regulation that have been targeting this, but we also know that business needs more than anything access to finance. That's the thing that's going to help with cash flow. The British Business Bank, which I look after, has a lot of schemes and initiatives to help with access to finance. We also want to make the rules around small and medium-sized businesses better and easier, lifting the definition of what is an SME so that they're not put under those onerous rules which the banks use which limit their access to finance. So Basel III, for example, is in our manifesto. All of those things together will help those small businesses that are dealing with cash flow.
Jonathan Reynolds.
Well, the question was about late payment, and I think it was well put. The specific change that we would make is to compel audit committees of large public companies to report on how quickly they actually pay their suppliers, not what the policy is, but what the actual payment is. So you're addressing some of that power imbalance, which I think is reflected in the question, and it is something something we would legislate to do as soon as possible.
Okay,
that wouldn't fix it.
Can I ask?
It's just reporting.
Can I ask another question around industrial strategy, Jonathan, and specifically to you? You talked about the need for investment, inward investment into the UK, and I wanted to just get a sense of how keen you are to get money from outside the UK in, for example, Gulf money or money from China, across a range of UK assets, from the nuclear industry to media assets like the Telegraph. What is Labour's policy on money from the Middle East and from China?
Absolutely. Well, those are two separate issues, but we are extremely keen on bringing in the inward investment that would make the difference. It's got to be part of the answer. I think the Gulf is an obvious place to look for that. I think with China, there's a slightly different set of factors to consider around national security and what that would mean, but we will be out there banging the drum for the UK, holding an investment summit within 100 days of forming a government and making the case. And to be honest, many of the things we've talked about today on stability, on industrial strategy, on skills, on how the labour market operates, they have come from the reasonable complaints that people bring to us and say we considered an investment in the UK but couldn't because either the Prime Minister changed in between considering it and actually executing the decision, or we just don't know what the UK is trying to be after 2016. I think our agenda directly reflects that, and once we've got it in place, we can get out there and sell it.
OK, just briefly, trying to make sure everyone gets the same amount of time. Just briefly, Kemi, if you had any thoughts on that.
We are the largest recipient of foreign direct investment certainly in Europe, more than France and Germany combined. That is a sign that what we are doing in this country as the Conservative government is working. Just in November, we raised £30 billion in one day at our Global Investment Summit. People want to be here. And we are creating an environment that means that people from all around the world want to bring in their money. Where it comes to the specific question on where the money comes from, we brought in the National Security and Investment Act. That was a Conservative policy. Okay. We're carrying out a lot of screening to make sure that the money that comes here is the type of money that we want to see invested in the UK.
OK, I'm going to move on now to a range of subjects that business just might want some clarity on, a range of business stories that have been very topical of late. And if we try and get time for both of you to answer all of these, that would be great. And we've talked a bit about money coming in from China, and I want to go to the fashion giant Shein, which obviously Chinese origins, even though it's based in Singapore right now. It could be one of London's biggest ever listings. There have been plenty of allegations around ESG issues around the business, plenty for critics and rivals to talk about. I wonder, Jonathan Reynolds, if you are business secretary, firstly, have you been meeting with them? And secondly, what conditions would you place on any listing if Shein wants to list in the UK, as it seems the news today would suggest that it does want to?
Oh, yes, we have met a lot of people considering economic activity in the UK. I've been speaking to the Labour Party over the last few years. You would expect, I think, that to take place. Look, my view is on any business of this sort, if they're doing business in the UK, we should ideally seek to regulate them from the UK, and the kind of expectations we would have, whether that is on labour market or regulatory compliance or tax, that is best done from them being based from the UK. So if a listing was to be considered, I would want that because I would know that is the way we could enforce the highest standards that we would expect.
So you would essentially, they'd have to comply with the same laws as a UK business?
Any listed company in the UK has a pretty significant set of compliance requirements placed upon them. So I think if you are keen to see businesses operate to the highest standards, you should want to see them do that from the UK.
Kemi Badenoch?
So I haven't met Shein, and the listing is exciting a lot of people. But I, as business secretary, look after both large and small businesses. And there are two concerns that I would have with this listing. Doesn't mean that we don't want them, but they would need to show us how they're addressing them. The first is the £135 threshold. This is a very, very interesting business model that Shein has. It's sending products direct to the customer, no warehousing, which means that they're right under the customs duty threshold. That could mean quite a lot lost in terms of taxes. Of course, they would still be getting VAT. That is something that we would want to look at. The other thing we would want to look at is forced labour and what they're doing in Xinjiang. So those are actually quite critical things with this specific listing.
OK, and would you put criteria around the listing, saying they have to comply with certain rules?
Well, the city is regulated, but we have regulators that do that. I'm talking specifically about this business and what we would want to see. We don't want a situation where the business secretary is intervening in every single listing. So we want a system that is well regulated. I think there's a lot more that we can do around the regulatory regime overall.
Let me come to the next question then, which is around Thames Water. We had mention already of the standard of water in this country. Should Thames Water be nationalised? And we'll just briefly answer this one if we could. Kemi Badenoch.
So with Thames Water, this is obviously a very, very difficult situation. I don't want to be talking about nationalisation while the business is going through these sorts of difficulties. These sorts of questions actually do move markets, and we need to be quite careful about that. What we need to make sure is that we have a regulatory regime that works well for our utilities. It is not working that well, as we have seen with the palaver with Thames Water. It is them dealing with that difficult trifecta of making sure that they can, if I can just finish, make a profit, keep bills low, and also continue to invest in infrastructure where we have seen issues. That is why what Jonathan said earlier about sewage is so wrong. Everything he said was false. We are not pumping more sewage into the waters because of Conservatives. We just need to deal with an infrastructure issue. No one is measuring that more than us.
I will get Jonathan Reynolds more time to answer, just to get both sides have the same amount of time. Jonathan Reynolds.
Well, if people are unhappy about the state of water, I think that is what I said, and that is true. I'll be sensitive based on the obvious sensitivities of the issue, but I would just say on any issue, investment can involve losing as well as gaining money. I mean, people should not expect the state to bail out bad investments. I wouldn't want to see a nationalisation. I think there should be a solution that falls short of that. But again, I think it's a reasonable point to make that if we're attracting money and there's good returns to be had from that across a whole range of regulated utilities, if that gets into problems, it's not the job of the state to.
Are you talking to anybody who you think could be a potential buyer then? Because the current shareholders call it uninvestable.
Well, I'm not going to get into that, but I, again, would say I think we would all want a system that delivers the kind of water infrastructure people quite rightly expect and gives investors a fair return on the money that's required for those big capital requirements, but does so in a way which is fair to everyone.
Okay, thank you for the answers you've given so far. And just finally, we'll close out with a sort of bigger picture question. Many in this room will want to know, you're here today because you're speaking about business, but maybe you have ambitions to speak about other things, to speak about other remits as well. So I want to understand if either of you have leadership intentions. Kemi, you've been through this once before, but I'll go to Jonathan first because you have not stood for leadership of the party, and I wonder if that is something that inspires you.
I am very much focused on being the Secretary of State for Business and Trade.
And not interested in leading the party?
I am very interested in being the Secretary of State for Business and Trade, and I would say when it comes to our leader, Keir Starmer, who's a friend as well as a colleague of mine, the job he has done in turning around Labour since 2019, that incredible, difficult election defeat we had, is quite exceptional.
Kemi Badenoch, we know that you have already tried, and we wonder whether you still have those ambitions.
I think it's obvious that question was for me. So let's not even pretend.
Jonathan tried to answer too.
I'm already the Secretary of Business and Trade, and it's actually been the job of a lifetime. I love it. There's no better job. It is a lot easier and a lot less pressured than being Prime Minister. The fact of the matter is, I stood and I lost. And what terrifies me now is not becoming leader. It is seeing Labour come in and us surrendering all of the work that we've done on the economy, on tax, on energy security to them, because they have no idea what is wrong and they have no idea how to fix things.
There is a chance that some cabinet ministers lose their elections. There's always that chance. There is a chance, according to some of the very detailed MLP polling. You'd be up for the challenge if it fell to you?
So this is one of the things that I have found most difficult doing this job, that people tend not to know what it is I'm doing because I'm always asked the leadership question. We're so interested in the personalities, in the gossip, and so on. And so we don't even know what work is taking place. We need to focus on this election. The choice is going to be between us or between them. Be afraid if it is them, is all I would say. And we will talk about leadership things after an election, but
well,
certainly
I tried.
Not before.
Well, I tried. OK, we're almost done. We always come to the end of our business debate. There is time, though, for some closing remarks. Let's wrap up with those closing statements. Jonathan Reynolds, your 30 seconds starts now.
Well, thank you very much. I think what we've heard today is that businesses are facing too many serious challenges to risk another 5 years of a chaotic and unstable government. And it's time to return to a government that solves problems rather than causes them. And I'm proud that we've worked so closely with business in drawing up our plans. And I can assure you that partnership will continue, because the only way we will end this low-growth, high-tax, poor public services doom loop of the last 14 years is with a changed Labour Party and our serious plan to grow the economy again. Thank you very much.
And now it's over to Kemi Badenoch.
Thank you. Today you have seen the difference between the Conservatives and Labour. Labour want to introduce new laws which will make it harder to hire, They want to micromanage your business to meet their political objectives. You need to ask yourselves, given what you've heard this afternoon, who is best to help your business prosper in what should be a time of great prosperity? Conservatives believe in capitalism. We believe in the power of business to do good. We don't think profit is a dirty word, and we are optimistic about our future.
Thank you both. A big thank you to Business Secretary Kemi Badenoch and also to Shadow Business Secretary Jonathan Reynolds for taking part in the debate. Coming up, we've heard from the politicians, and next we'll find out what our panel of Bloomberg journalists has to say about what we've heard. We will bring you that shortly. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Policy, border security, foreign policy, and more. Voters head to the polls to choose the next leader. Bloomberg has full coverage leading up to the election and will bring you the results after all the votes are tallied. Tune in for continuing coverage on Bloomberg Television. Context changes everything. The countdown is on. Everything you need to get the edge at the end of the market day. Get ahead of tomorrow's trading with The Close, weekdays at 3 p.m. only on Bloomberg Television. Context changes everything.
From the beating heart of global finance, economics, and politics, and wherever newsmakers are moving markets, Bloomberg brings you conversations that allow for deep discussions and important insights. What do you think the future is for inflation? Is this a new normal? Are markets too optimistic? How do you worry about the things that are outside your control? How does the current fighting completely stop? I'm Francine Lacroix, and this is The Pulse, every weekday at 9 a.m. only on Bloomberg.
The Middle East and Africa regions are home to some of the biggest deals and fastest growth in the world. Vibrant resources and high-yield investment opportunities abound. I'm Jumana Bersecci. Join me on Bloomberg Horizon's Middle East and Africa for the stories, newsmakers, and insights shaping the decisions of traders across this exciting region.
We're scaling up at incredible pace.
This region is growing so rapidly.
The opportunity is really huge. Every trading day, only on Bloomberg.
Good morning. This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. I'm Tom McKenzie in London. These are the stories that set your agenda.
Taking you from the U.S. market's close to the overnight session in Asia. We'll walk you through what you need to know to kickstart the European trading day. Live from our European headquarters, we bring you the day's top market-moving stories, unmatched expert analysis, and on-the-ground reporting from across the continent. Tune in every weekday at 6 a.m. London time, only on Bloomberg Television.
Asia is at the forefront of some of the world's biggest stories. I'm Sherrian in Tokyo.
And I'm Heidi Stroud-Watts here in Sydney, where the trading day begins. We're here in the center of all the action to get you set up with the numbers, news, and knowledge you need for the day ahead.
The demand is indeed recovering.
We've been waiting for this moment.
The opportunity of a century.
Join us on Bloomberg The Asia Trade. Weekdays only on Bloomberg TV. Context changes everything.
Bloomberg Surveillance covers the latest in global markets and the political events that influence your world. Join Jonathan Farrell, Lisa Abramowitz, and Anne-Marie Hordern only on Bloomberg. Context changes everything.
Welcome back to the Election 2024 business debate on Bloomberg TV and on Bloomberg Radio. We've had some big pledges from UK Business Secretary Kemi Badenoch and Labour's Shadow Business Secretary Jonathan Reynolds. We've also heard from leading business groups, at least through the questions that they put forward before this debate. Now let's get the thoughts of Bloomberg UK correspondent Lizzie Burden, UK senior economy reporter here at Bloomberg Phil Aldrich, and Bloomberg's city editor Catherine Griffiths. Well, a lot for everybody to listen to, a lot to digest. Lizzie, if I come to you first, your overall impressions of what we heard there, or key takeaways?
I thought it was really interesting from Jonathan Reynolds that he says Labour's all about growing the economy. Well, even Labour insiders say that the easiest way to grow the economy would be to rejoin the single market and customs union, and he's not saying that that is going to happen. He's ruling that out. And so then what's the plan to grow the economy? He talked about planning, he talked about better ties with Europe. And you have to ask, and you did ask, if these were easy wins, why wouldn't the Conservatives have achieved them already? As Kemi Badenoch quoted, Michel Barnier over the weekend was saying you can't cherry pick with the EU relationship. And it was very interesting to me when Jonathan Reynolds talked about ECJ oversight. We have to wonder whether that is something that would be on the negotiating table. He's saying that he doesn't want to give up Labour's negotiating hand, bit like the unions. We don't know how the plans could change. And a line that was really interesting to me was when he said, of course, when circumstances change, plans change. Could we yet see more surprises from Labour?
OK, so that's talking about their relationship with Europe. That's talking about how they get to those growth targets that they've promised. Phil, what stood out to you?
Well, I think Kemi won the soundbite war there. Fishing in an empty barrel for solutions on growth was a good line. And there was a sense that we didn't get specifics on how Labour were going to deliver this growth. Obviously, they repeated the sort of mantra of planning, reform, and getting stability going, as we've started to see, and also the Brexit point that basically that we're going to have a closer relationship with Europe. There was some interesting sort of differences of opinion over. But I thought the Xi'an point was quite striking, because obviously we had Labour saying that they would accept a Xi'an flotation without too much issues that they would put on the company. Whereas Kemi was obviously raising concerns about the Labour rights.
We've had at least 3 different pronunciations as well of the business. So that's something we'll all have to master. Surely, Catherine, what stood out to you? Perhaps on that subject, as city editor, with an eye on the city, that's something that you're focused on.
Yeah, for sure. I suppose the sort of role reversal thing, in a way, that it's sort of easy in a way for Jonathan Reynolds to say, we're very keen to have listings, a sort of reasonably open-minded approach to those companies. And of course, Kemi Badenoch actually sitting there doing the job, sort of making these points about worker rights and various different concerns and rules and regulations. Although, of course, she very neatly made it not her problem and talked about it being a kind of UK regulatory framework problem for whether or not Xi'an should list here, which, again, I suppose goes to show the experienced politician she is. I think that time and time again, business tells you that it wants stability, and I think that Kemi Badenoch did a really good job of sort of speaking in a very sort of authoritative way. Those old lines about we love business, they don't love business, things would be astonishing and unbelievable if Labour came in. I don't think that really rings true with the business and city community.
Well, and we remember what Boris Johnson famously said about business, which I won't repeat. I mean, and he's not leading the party anymore, but that does raise interesting questions about how far back people's memories are going when they're voting. Are they voting about what's on offer now? Are they voting on what's in the manifesto? Are they thinking about the last 15 years or so? And it's probably a different answer for lots of different people. Phil, you made the point to me before this about the speed at which Labour needs to ramp up growth if it wants to deliver the plans that it's set out. And we got Liz, you mentioned, we got a few hints of that around planning perhaps, but we're still looking for more detail. That's where reporting goes next, I suppose, pushing into more detail as to how you get there.
Yeah, so the IFS, obviously, both of them kind of rejected the IFS position that there's been a conspiracy of silence about how the country is going to pay its way. And the issue, I mean, obviously, green growth is the elixir. I mean, obviously, Jonathan Reynolds said we could get back to the Labour's, the Blair era, New Labour, 2% a year growth, but there's not been any sign of that because productivity has collapsed for the last 14 years. So unless you have a vision for how to get that to that increase in productivity back again, then you have to say that the IFS position that both parties, whoever would form the government, will have to sort of make some difficult decision on taxes to balance the books. Those do seem kind of inevitable.
And that's just the policy. What about if Labour, if it became the government, had its own surprises, like the pandemic, like the war in Ukraine? A point well made by Kemi.
Yes, indeed. I mean, yes, when facts change, you change your mind and things. I mean, we've had differing interpretations, I suppose, from both parties as to what extent a manifesto represents a programme for the next Parliament and to what extent it just represents some sort of opening salvo. And in different interviews, you maybe get different messages there. I wonder, I mean, on some of the more detailed questioning, Thames Water was interesting. Kemi Badenoch keen not to move asset prices at all. Jonathan Reynolds warning investors you shouldn't expect to not ever lose money, which I thought was an interesting one. Something you've been following quite closely, Phil.
Yeah, so it was striking that Kemi said that it's basically, she seemed to be saying it was a regulatory issue, that there is a sort of failure of regulation was what I took away from what she was saying, whereas Jonathan Reynolds was saying that, if you make a bad investment, you lose your shirt, and that's just the way it should be. And so it'll be, is there going to be some further overhaul of water regulation under Labour, as might happen should the Tories win?
And we tried with a question at the end, Lizzie, around leadership. I mean, we know that Kemi Badenoch has already tried. And as I said to her, some of the polling, when they go seat by seat, it does suggest that some in the cabinet might find it difficult to hang on to their seats.
I noted that Paddy Power's got her odds on 11-4, the favourite to be the next Tory leader. So well denied. But clearly the leadership ambitions are being talked about in the background.
Yeah, indeed. I wonder, I mean, there was a lot of mention about what business does and does not want, Catherine, when it came to both Kemi Badenoch and Jonathan Reynolds. Obviously, our questions were informed by the business groups who are in the room, and I very much look forward to catching up with them and finding out what they thought. Any final takeaways, anybody, from the sort of business perspective and what all of this means?
Yeah, I think the Europe thing will be incredibly important for the business community. That potential sense that Labour might let the ECJ play a role in some sort of future UK-EU relationship, I think will be really scrutinised. I think Johnny Reynolds hasn't said that much about sort of his international view, and he was asked today about, well, OK, so how will you actually get investment in from, say, the Gulf or China? And people will really want to know the answer to those questions. But the thing he said that I think may ring most true with the business community is he said that there's a lot of foreign investors, and actually this counts for all investors, that they haven't known since 2016 what the hell the plan is.
OK.
They want a clear view.
OK, thank you all very, very much. Thank you to our Bloomberg panel, UK correspondent Lizzie Burden, UK senior economy reporter Phil Aldrich, and our city editor Catherine Griffiths. And that brings us to the end of the UK Election 24 business debate. Thank you very much for joining us here on Bloomberg TV and on Bloomberg Radio.